Chapter 40. The Boy Who Remembered. On a quiet night at the end of his 7th year, Ethan Cole took stock of everything, the way he had taken stock on the very first night in the crib, and found that he had won, and that winning had only moved him to the foot of a far larger mountain. He let himself count the victories first, because they were real and they were his, and he had bled for everyone. His father was alive. The wet road had come, and he had stood inside its 4 seconds, and he had broken it, and David Cole was asleep down the hall with all his living years still ahead of him. The widow at the window would never exist. Emma would grow up with a father. Susan would grow old with a husband. The long gray ruin of the first life was unmade, every thread of it gone. Marcus had a refuge now, and years yet before the water, and a friend who would not fail him twice. The family's small armor thickened beneath them. And in Ethan's own chest, the fire he had thought he'd spent on the road had not died but deepened, the wall broken, the road past kindling opened, true cultivation begun, power drawn now from the world itself. It was everything he had come back to do, and more than he had dared hope, and he let himself feel the full warm weight of it once before he turned to the other ledger. Because there was another ledger, and it had grown as fast as the first. The personal map was dying, his foreknowledge of his own family's future unraveling thread by thread as the saved father rippled outward, leaving him to walk the near years increasingly blind. The ether of the world felt thicker than the map allowed, a tide perhaps already turning, the return perhaps closer than 2027. His secret was bruised, his father carrying a question that would take years to soothe. And out past the edge of the world, something vast and ancient and patient had turned its head toward him at last, seen his growing fire, and begun, slowly, surely, to come. A watcher he had no plan for, connected somehow to the cold place without stars and the voice that had sent him here, the first edge of a mystery far larger than a wet road in 1999. He had spent 5 years solving a single morning. He understood now that the single morning had only ever been the beginning, the nearest, smallest, most personal of the things he had come back to face. Behind it stood the tide, and behind the tide stood whatever was coming for him across the dark, and behind that, dimly, stood the unanswered question he had set down on the first night and never dared pick up. Why? Why him? Why again? Why a tired, ordinary man had been thrown back through a cold place without stars into his own small body, with a fire in his chest and a map in his head, and a watcher learning his name. The easy part was over. He saw that clearly, on the quiet night at the end of his 7th year. Saving his father had been the easy part, a near and human problem a patient boy could solve with foreknowledge and love, and 4 seconds of desperate power. Everything ahead was harder, and larger, and darker, and the map that had carried him this far would carry him less and less of the way. But Ethan Cole was not the tired, ordinary man who had fallen into the cold place without stars, and he was not, anymore, the frightened mind waking in a crib to the horror of small hands. He was something new, something the 5 years had made. A boy with a man's memory and a man's patience and a fire grown in the dark. A son who had reached across a lifetime and rewritten his own fate. A cultivator standing, alone and unknowing, at the very bottom of a ladder whose top reached past every sovereign who had ever lived, though he did not yet know the ladder had a name or that the name existed. He had proven on a flooded road the one thing that mattered most, that the future was not stone. That a man who refused to stop, could reach into the most weighted day of his life and break it. He had done it once. He would do it again, and again, as many times as the years ahead demanded, against the tide and against the Watcher and against whatever stood behind them both. He was no longer alone, not in the way he had thought he was safe. Something knew he was here. But he was no longer alone in the other way either, the way that had ached. He had a saved family asleep down the hall, a friend with a refuge, a life that was good and warm and worth every cost there would ever be. He would protect it. He would grow strong enough to protect it through anything. And he would find out in time what had sent him back and what was coming, and what waited at the top of the long, dark climb. The countdown had begun, the real one now, not the small one toward a single morning, but the great one toward a torn sky and a coming Watcher, and a destiny he could not yet see. Only Ethan could hear it ticking. Only Ethan ever would. He lay in the dark at the end of his 7th year, the boy who remembered and was not afraid. There was work ahead, the largest work there was, and he had already learned the only lesson that mattered, that he could change anything if he only refused ever to stop. He closed his eyes and reached out into the thin, growing haze of the world, and drew the cold fire in and began, that very night, to make ready for everything still to come. End of Book 1, The Boy Who Remembered.